今回のディープダイブのミッションは、Tomi Yoshida さんの観測記録を深掘りすることです。So, our mission today is to dive deep into an amazing observational record from Tomi Yoshida. Now, right off the bat, we need to be clear about what we are doing here. We're not here to evaluate AI, we're not giving you a how-to guide, and we are absolutely not here to hand you any neat, tidy conclusions. Instead, we're going to sit with unfinished thoughts. We are looking at pending questions and ideas that simply do not need to be wrapped up with a bow, under the premise that we are right in the middle of a massive societal transition. Because of that, some parts of this observation might feel a little unnatural or even a bit uncomfortable. But that slight friction, we're leaving it exactly as it is, intentionally uncorrected. It's all part of observing how language, technology, and human judgment interact when everything is changing.
To really get what Yoshida is talking about, we've got to agree to these ground rules for our explainer today. We are actively choosing to sit with that slight discomfort and the friction of communication. We're looking at the raw data of human adaptation. It's kind of like admiring a sketch where the artist's erased pencil marks are still totally visible. We are intentionally leaving these thoughts completely unresolved.
So, where does this whole observation start? It actually begins with something really everyday. Yoshida was just reading a historically accurate article online. The topic was the Enigma machine, the complex World War II encryption device, and Alan Turing, the legendary mathematician who helped crack its codes. But it wasn't just a dry history lesson. The article viewed Turing's huge historical struggle through the very modern lens of contemporary computing and artificial intelligence.
He reads the facts, understands the timeline, and then he scrolls down to the comments section. We've all been there, right? But here's the twist. Yoshida realized that the commenters seemed to be inhabiting entirely diverging realities. They had all been fed the exact same, mathematically identical text, yet their takeaways had fractured completely. It made him stop and ask a really profound question. Are we actually reading the same words?
It's wild to look at how this fracture happens. From the exact same paragraphs and vocabulary, one half of the commenters bypassed the historical aspect entirely. They just wanted to fiercely debate the existential risks and doomsday warnings of artificial intelligence. Meanwhile, another massive faction completely ignored all that philosophical AI debate. They were exclusively discussing raw server capabilities and comparing modern computing power to Turing's era.
And it didn't stop there. You had cryptography purists deep in the weeds arguing over rotor positions and ciphers, completely isolated from yet another group whose sole focus was on Turing's tragic personal history and the emotional weight of his story. Think about that. 4 distinct groups. They all clicked at the exact same URL, but they extracted 4 entirely unrelated conversations.
So what does this all mean? Well, we usually walk around with this fundamental assumption that if we read the same paragraph, we ingest the same information. But Yoshida's observation highlights a much more uncomfortable idea. We don't mechanically absorb data. We are just scanning the page to find a mirror for our own vocabulary, our professions, our memories, and our uneasiness. We are literally mining the text for our own pre-existing anxieties.
To figure out why this happens, Yoshida brings in a really fascinating concept from his Japanese cultural background. It's called yohaku. It translates roughly to the margins, the blank space, or the unsaid. The idea here is that meaning is never solely fixed by the characters on the page. In fact, what is deliberately left out of the sentence is what actively shapes what the receiver actually hears.
Let me give you a brilliant, everyday example to show you how yohaku actually works mechanically. Think of a super simple, objective sentence. It's getting late. If a dinner party host says that to you at 11 p.m., the invisible margin, the unsaid part, means you need to leave my house immediately. But take those exact same words spoken by your worried spouse while you are hunched over your laptop at midnight. Now the margin completely changes reality. It means, I am worried about your health, please go to sleep. The literal text is identical, but the unsaid margin does all the heavy lifting.
What I love about this is that neither interpretation is inherently wrong. The spouse isn't hallucinating, and the dinner guest isn't misreading the situation. It just proves that reading, or listening, is never a robotic act of data transfer. Our brains are actively, cognitively filling in the blanks. Reading is an intensely personal, highly subjective act.
Okay, but let's push back on this for a second. If meaning is truly this fluid, if every single time we read an article we are just projecting our internal worlds and coloring in the blank spaces with our own personal baggage, how do we ever actually communicate objective facts? How do we navigate the current era of massive societal shifts if we're all just hallucinating a shared conversation? And that brings us right to the friction Yoshida is watching so closely. And he applies it directly to technology. Take the word AI. It is literally just 2 letters, an acronym.
Yet it acts as the ultimate Rorschach inkblot test for modern society. When people encounter those two letters, they experience wildly different, intensely visceral reactions.
Let's walk through what that looks like in practice. Imagine reading the headline, AI passes the bar exam. 5 completely objective words. But watch how the margins fill in. A lawyer reads it, and instantly their margin is filled with severe anxiety about job loss and economic threats. A software developer reads the exact same words and sees professional triumph and venture capital funding. A sci-fi fan sees Skynet and sentient machines. And a busy paralegal reads it and sees automation, hoping they might finally get to go home early. The letters are just a vessel, right? And the reader pours their own fears and hopes right into the margins.
This cognitive fracturing is the root of the great technology misalignment we are experiencing today. People firmly believe they are debating the exact same system. Yoshida uses this amazing analogy. Imagine 2 people passionately arguing over the exact same topographical map. Because of their internal margins, one person thinks it's a map to buried treasure, so they are incredibly excited and want to rush forward. But the other person is absolutely convinced it's a map of a deadly minefield, so they are terrified and screaming to stop.
They are standing in completely different realities before the debate even begins. And here is the absolute tragedy of ignoring those invisible margins. Because they don't realize their reading is subjective, they assume the other person is either completely foolish or actively malicious. When we fail to recognize our own subjective anxieties filtering the text, conversations become hopelessly misaligned.
So with our brains wired to read our own biases into every text, leading to this massive misalignment in human communication, how does Tommy Yoshida actually resolve this huge paradox? How do we fix this?
Well, here's the twist. He doesn't. And we have to remember our ground rules for this explainer. Yoshida explicitly refuses to offer a tidy conclusion. He never declares an ultimate truth about human communication or how we should regulate AI discourse. He actively resists the urge to close the loop because he is honoring the immense value of the unfinished thought.
Instead of rushing to a conclusion, he focuses on what he calls the quiet process. Notice how his arc zooms further and further out. He starts by reading the historical article. Then, he zooms out to read the diverging reactions in the comments. Finally, he zooms out again to read the very act of reading itself. Interpreting technology, reading comments, reacting to stimuli, they are all part of the exact same quiet process of filtering the world through our invisible margins.
There is serious power and real courage in choosing not to conclude. In a period of rapid technological transition, rushing to a heavy-handed conclusion often forces a false consensus. It just triggers immediate, reactionary debate. By keeping the thought unfinished, Yoshida invites us to pause. He invites us to become meta-readers, to actively observe the shifting meanings and watch our own instincts at play, rather than just reacting.
He actually wants you to actively watch your own quiet process happen in real time. The very next time you read a breaking news headline, ask yourself this: what is the very first emotion that spikes in your chest? What is the specific detail your brain highlights while completely ignoring the rest of the paragraph?
When you recognize that instinct, you're catching your own personal margin at work. Mindful reading isn't about absorbing a fixed objective meaning. It is about noticing where your own attention naturally drifts. Once you realize that everyone online is fiercely defending their own margins rather than debating objective facts, all the immense friction of online communication starts to make a lot more sense.
So, I want to leave you with a scenario to think about today. As you read your next email, article, or comment section, challenge yourself. Ask, what invisible margins are you bringing to the text that absolutely no one else can see? Are you truly reacting to the objective letters on the screen, or are you just reacting to the echo of your own experiences, your own profession, and your own anxieties?
And this naturally takes us to an even deeper, kind of existential place. If we as humans use our deeply personal anxieties and past experiences to fill in the blank spaces of language, what happens with artificial intelligence? When an AI system reads massive amounts of data and generates text, what collective, averaged-out biases is the AI using to fill in its own margins?
If AI is filtering through a collective human bias, and then we are filtering that output through our own deeply personal anxieties, are we truly seeing the same thing? We're going to do exactly what Yoshida does, and just let that provocative question hang right in the air today. We are resisting the urge to wrap it up with a bow, leaving you in a state of deep, unresolved reflection. Keep your thoughts open, embrace the friction of the unsaid, and always mind the margins.